Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage President and CEO of GMDC, Patrick Spear.
Good afternoon. Welcome to day 2 of the CCC session here at GM19. Hope you're all having a great day. If you haven't been outside yet during one of your breaks, I would encourage you to get out there. It's absolutely spectacular. Also, happy Father's Day to all the dads here today. Hope you're having a great day. I know, speaking as a father of college-age kids, apparently my middle guy finally decided to get up today because I just got a text from him at 1:20 Central Time. We got another day, a day to recognize today as well. I don't know if she's in the room right now, and if she is, she's going to kill me. And if she's not, I'll hear about it later. But today is Maureen Allen's birthday on our team. She's working over at the Reg desk, so if you get a chance, stop by and wish Maureen a happy birthday. Okay, Vicki Barnard has asked me to remind everybody, especially the dads, at our evening event tonight, we're going to be outside, weather permitting, and for all the fathers that are here today, please bring a business card with you to dinner because we're going to be raffling off some cool things on Father's Day tonight. So by all means, bring a business card and drop it in the bowl, and we'll be doing a cool raffle later on tonight. As I did yesterday, I want to make sure we recognize our partners that are out in the foyer. If you haven't stopped by to see our friends at Nielsen and learn more about the GM hierarchy, I would encourage you to do so. And also all of our friends that are out there doing some cool things this week. 313 Sales Group, Wabata. We've got our friends from Hallmark and American Greetings doing great things with greeting cards this week. So stop by, send something back to a loved one. And also our friends at Kodak Moments. If you haven't already downloaded a photo and gotten a keychain, you should stop by and do that. And again, you can text the word create to 58888 and they'll make you a pretty cool keychain. So by all means, get out there and say hello to everybody when you have a moment. It seems fitting that today, as we get ready for our business session from our friends at Kearney, that we're doing it today. I don't know how many people recall what happened 2 years ago today, June 16th. If you don't remember, I'll tell you. I was in Chicago, and it's ironic today, it was 2 years ago today that we had our first meeting with ATK to talk about partnering with GMDC on delivering insights. And I was getting ready to meet Mark McKelsey for a 9 a.m. appointment in Chicago on a Friday morning. And about a half hour before that meeting, my phone starts blowing up in my pocket. And so it was 2 years ago today that Amazon announced they were buying Whole Foods. And it was 2 years ago today that we first met with ATK to talk about how do we deliver insights that will help our members drive sales and help transform their business, which is what we're all about and what you're going to hear about today. So 2 years ago today, started this journey with Kearney. I'm happy to introduce today Jason Maehara from ATK out of their Toronto office, and he's going to walk us through the results of our annual GM benchmarking survey that we've now started to bring year 2 with ATK on this annual survey. Jason's going to walk through the insights that have bubbled up from the survey we did with members and with the industry. So you'll hear about that in a little bit. Following Jason's comments and presentation, I would ask you to stick around because our Education Leadership Council co-chairs, Greg Parsons from Kroger and Mark Duchel from Navajo, are going to have some comments and insights predicated on what you're going to hear from ATK. So stick around. At the end, you'll hear from Greg Parsons from Kroger and also Mark Duchel from Navajo. They'll have some insights to share with you. And with that, I'm happy to introduce Jason Maehara from Kearney. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah? Okay. Go Raptors, yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason. I'm a manager based out of the Toronto office with Kearney. Do a lot of work in food, drug, and mass with a bunch of retailers across North America. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you the results of our 2019 benchmarking study. Just to give you guys a bit of context around how we got to some of the insights here today, really 3 things. We used a lot of, data. So with the help of Nielsen, we were able to build in some of that hierarchy data into the presentation today, as well as supplement that with a bunch of secondary research. The second thing we did was spoke to a lot of people. So we interviewed a lot of retail executives, retail experts in this space to get their insights and perspective. And finally, conducted a quant survey, which many of you may have gotten in your email, so thank you for those who participated, to really get some additional insights across the industry. So that being said, we'll go ahead and jump in. So US general merch sales continued to decline in brick and mortar stores in 2018, although the decline did soften this past year. So as you can see here in 2018, sales were down 1.6% compared to 3.2% the year before. And if you look below the graph, what you'll see is that a lot of that is driven by price. So from a unit perspective, sales actually, or units rather, actually continued to worsen. However, it was saved a lot by the average price point there, which increased up to 2.4% last year. So a really interesting stat there, and we'll continue to kind of peel the onion back and unfold more insights as to what's happening. But I mean, overall, general merch does continue to be a challenging landscape for brick and mortar retailers across FDM. So GM financial trends by retailer type also tells a story that differs across food, drug, and mass. All are continuing to decline from both a unit and sales perspective, like we saw on the last page. Drug, on one hand, continues to be the biggest declining retailer type. And we think there are a few reasons why. One is an increased focus on other types of categories, like self-care categories, beauty, personal care, health and wellness, et cetera. But there's also a lot of competitive threats in the pharmacy space, if you think about online pharmacies like PillPack, et cetera, that are starting to really reduce some of the traffic that we're seeing in some of these stores. From a food and mass perspective, again, relatively steady, with mass being the main contributor to actually the average price trend in 2018. So if you look at the very last row of the table beneath the graph, you'll see that in 2017, prices for mass retailers declined on average by 2%, and we saw that actually flip this past year in 2018. So they're really the retailer type that's driving a lot of that trend that you saw on the prior page. So there's a lot going on this page, so I'll tee it up and explain. But digging deeper and looking at the category view shows that although most categories are down, there are a handful that have continued to show growth for different reasons. So if you look at the graph here, what you'll see on the x-axis is the unit change year over year, and on the y-axis, the price change. Your green bubbles are categories that grew in terms of sales year over year, while your blue categories are ones that declined. The size of the bubble dictates the size of the category as well. So on the left side, you have 2018 compared to 2017, and on the right side, you have 2017 compared to 2016. So just to level set, because I know this is a really interesting and sometimes controversial page, this is only 2 to 3 years of data. There obviously are longer-term trends that are happening in these categories, and these categories are also huge. So all of you look at a lot of this data on a day-to-day basis within your specific industry, with your retailer, and it may tell a different story than what we're seeing here. But at the end of the day, this is kind of definitely a rolled-up view across the industry, so just keep that in mind as we're sort of talking through the narrative today. So looking at the category view for 2018, 11 of 18 GM categories declined in sales, which is actually an improvement from the year before where 14 categories declined. 3 categories actually grew 2 years in a row, automotive, pet, and hardware, while 4 categories reversed the trend from the year before, apparel, baby, toys, and electric appliances. Pet and baby are actually 2 interesting categories, which we're going to dive into a little more later. But they did show up in previous benchmarking studies as categories that were on the decline. And it's interesting to see that a lot that's happening in this category is around that innovation and the right product selection that we've kind of recommended in previous years. So it's interesting to see how the numbers are starting to change from some of these benchmarking studies that we've done in the past. So now we'll dive a bit into retailer sentiment and the survey results that we conducted. So we asked the question, how do you perceive the competitive landscape shifting in the next 3 to 5 years for your business? So results showed that roughly 80% of FDM retailers believe that the GM market will become even more competitive, with drug retailers being the most concerned. Some key factors were cited. One, not surprisingly, online. 70% of respondents mentioned this as one of the key threats, or the key threat. and 25% responded that discount was a key threat for them as well. So now this is sort of a snapshot, and especially the data is a snapshot of up to the end of 2018. So a lot has gone on since then, and retailers are making a lot of headway to sort of start to bridge this gap, I think. So if we think about different initiatives that are going on right now, new formats. I know this is a thing that's been going on for a while, but I feel like it's starting to pick up a bit. Target, Nordstrom are great examples of this. We're also seeing a lot of product innovation through things like private label. Kroger and their clothing line is a great example of that as well. So retailers are starting to really tackle this head on and figure out what they can do to get ahead of the increasing level of competitiveness that we're seeing in the industry. So to recap, the brick and mortar GM market continues to decline, but at a slower pace, with increased prices offsetting the trend. The trend is similar across all retailer types. And although most categories are down, select have seen growth. And retailers believe that the landscape will continue to become more competitive going forward. Now, based on the numbers, it's clear that GM is facing an uphill battle. In fact, you may be asking yourself, is GM dead? Well, I'm going to spend the rest of the time of our time together today explaining to you that it's not. General merchandise is really at a transformational crossroads. Consumers still need GM, but they're going to different places to find it. Online retailers, they're going direct to consumer through pop-ups. What's really happening is that there's a level of increasing competition for the attention of the consumer in the GM space. And that's really fundamentally changing the way consumers think about GM and really make their purchase decision. So let's dive into it a bit. So I wouldn't be a good consultant if I didn't have a framework, so we're going to walk you through this now. So GM is changing a way that really requires retailers to tailor their category strategies based on the way consumers purchase. So we see sort of a spectrum with two different ends here. I'll walk you through what this means, and we'll sort of use this to talk through the rest of the presentation. So on the left side, you have what we're calling chore categories. So things like household products, like paper products, cleaning supplies, et cetera. Things like office products as well. And these are categories that are recurring purchases. They're categories that have a bit of a lower emotional connection for the consumer to them. And what consumers are looking for really are competitive pricing and convenience. On the right-hand side, you have categories that we're calling shop categories. And what these are categories that have a greater emotional connection for the consumer, and they have a greater emphasis on really brands. And when the consumer is looking to purchase these products, the focus really is on the shopping experience and innovation in products. So what does this mean for retailers? And that's what we sort of have there on the bottom of the slide when we talk about next practices, which are really just the forward-looking best practices for these categories. And for the chore categories, it's really about maximizing your in-store productivity, making drastic changes in the way you merchandise and how much you put in your store based on your local customer needs. On the right side, it really is about refining that retail experience. Be bold. Invest and think about what would really move the needle and build the right retail experience for your customers. So what we have on this page is data on category growth for both brick and mortar as well as online. So keep in mind these are growth rates. So despite categories being up significantly on the online side, the piece of the pie is probably a bit smaller, of course. So in the red bar, you have the growth rate for online, and in the green bar, brick and mortar from some of the data that we'd seen before. And what I want to sort of tee up here is that we think of chore and shop as a spectrum. It's not a binary thing, because a lot of these categories, when you start to dig a little deeper, have subcategories that are a bit more chore or a bit more shop. I'm sure as retailers, when you look at your customer base and your geographic spread, you have pockets where customers are a bit more shop-oriented versus a bit more chore-oriented. So it's not black and white. That's the one thing I want to sort of tee up front here. It very much is a spectrum. So we're going to start on the left today with the chore categories. And again, these are routine categories. They're placed in advance. They're very consistent. And what we're seeing here is a lot of rapid online growth combined with declines in brick and mortar. So we're going to talk a little bit about why now. So we're going to start off with household. And for this discussion includes subcategories like cleaning, batteries, light bulbs, et cetera. And we've seen a decline in brick and mortar, but also obviously a lot of online rapid growth. In fact, across all of retail, household is the second fastest growing category at 34%, only second to grocery at 38%, so it's a pretty close race there. From a category performance perspective, essentially every subcategory saw a price increase. You can see they're all above the axis there. And there are really two factors at play. So one is a bit more focus on the right pricing and promo strategy. We spoke with a large grocery retailer, and they explained how they really took a look at their customers and what they wanted, and as a result of that, really increased the frequency of their promos, but decreased the depth. So really shifting a bit more away from that high-low approach, and as a result of that, they saw a lot of rapid growth in their category. The second is premiumization. So a lot of these growth categories, like floor care and cleaning as an example, really have a focus on more natural, sort of chemical-free products that are really driving that price point up, which is what we're seeing here in this category. We'll talk a little bit about batteries here. So batteries, obviously the biggest category here, and you can see on the right, there's been a bit of a shift in the channel, preferred channel approach. Brick and mortar retailers saw a decline of 5% year over year. Whereas online saw growth of 75% and Amazon saw growth of 93%. So a lot of factors at play here. Obviously, for most people, they can be a recurring purchase. They're obviously bulkier in some cases or heavier. In terms of just what Amazon specifically is doing is really driving a lot of growth through their private label, as well as the marketplace offerings that they have. So that's sort of some of the drivers behind this trend that we're seeing here. So in terms of brick and mortar retailer implications, I think this quote is interesting here. People only care about convenience and price. No one wants to carry giant packages home. That's why online and discount are really growing. So I think that, that quote really kind of drives home the point about this category here and what we're seeing at a macro level. So now we'll talk a bit about school and office, another what we're classifying as sort of more chore category. Seen a lot of online growth, but also growth within specialty retail, which is interesting. You can see here, every category showed a year-over-year sales decline in brick and mortar. They're all blue. But brick and mortar is clearly losing traction. Online and specialty retailers are really doing a lot to drive growth in that space. Online, not surprisingly, through convenience. Amazon's online supply chain sales were actually, office supply sales were actually $3 billion in 2018, and you can see across all of FDM, it was $6 billion. So definitely taking a big piece of that pie. With specialty, what we're seeing is a lot of these retailers have focused their shift to B2B. Office Depot is a great example. They have an online B2B subscription service that grew 13% last year. So a lot of these retailers are making a lot of shifts to figure out how to best continue to protect their space. In terms of implications for retailers, it's really the need to evaluate investments, given growing preferences in the way consumers shop. And it really is the need to determine if and how they really want to compete in that category. So chore categories really come down to three different things: convenience, time, and cost. Currently, online retailers are perceived to be the leader across all these three categories. You can see here in the red bar. But what I think is most interesting is that consumers expect these things out of their brick and mortar experience as well. That middle bar there is sort of what you're seeing. So when it comes to that, things like intuitive store layouts, things like simple wayfinding, checkout efficiency are really becoming a piece of delivering that positive in-store experience to deliver on these values that consumers expect. There's a lot going on this page as well, so I'm not going to talk through all of it. But with this in mind, providing that convenience and that fulfillment are becoming a very important element of brick and mortar. Although a lot of retailers have begun to invest in that space and made strides, we've yet to catch up with what the consumers want. So I'll start off with the buy online, pick up in store. You can see there 38% of retailers, and this is broader than just FDM, this is across all retail, offer in-store pickup for online purchases, whereas consumer demand is at about 70%. So still a big gap there, although there's some progress being made. If you go to the very last one there, same-day delivery, 65% of retailers plan to invest in same-day delivery. Not even have yet, but plan to invest. Whereas the demand for that is at about 80%. So obviously, very interesting to see the spike in consumer demand for some of these services. And obviously there are some retailers that are doing a great job of that. I think Walmart's a great example. So they're a great example of a brick and mortar retailer that has invested heavily in both convenience and fulfillment. Online or buy online, pickup in store at well over 2,000 of their stores. They've installed over 700 pickup towers across the country. So definitely investing on the convenience side. When it comes to fulfillment, they've made a commitment to reach 75% of US households by 2019 across well over 100 metropolitan areas. So definitely making a lot of strides there. I know retailers are sort of picking their battles and where they want to play in this space, but Walmart's a great example of a company that's done this pretty broadly across their fleet. So now what we're going to do is shift gears a little bit and talk a bit more about the right side of the spectrum. So we're going to talk about the shop categories. So just as a reminder, these tend to be categories where consumers are looking for more of an emotional and experiential connection, and a bit more focused on specific brands and products that meet their unique needs. So shop categories obviously lead well to a favorable brick and mortar experience, because obviously being in that store allows retailers to really curate and develop that emotional connections with their customer. So we're going to do 3 deep dives here. We're going to talk about pet, baby, and home, and why we're seeing some different trends across those 3 categories. So the first example we'll walk through is baby, where there's a clear separation of shop and chore categories. I talked about this being a spectrum. When you peel the onion back on baby, it's very apparent here. I'll turn your attention to the top right of the bubble chart there. So what we've highlighted there is what we believe are more of the shop categories. So again, higher motion. You can see here, because they're green and they're further up, a bit more growth in brick and mortar. And these categories have really benefited from premiumization. A lot of these categories you'll see have a bit more focus on safety and health, which are obviously big elements that new parents and new families want to focus on. A couple of interesting stats. If you look sort of across a lot of these categories, anything related with organic baby care grew 10% in 2018. And then as well, we're seeing a lot of direct-to-consumer brands sell through brick and mortar stores like Honest Coats, et cetera. So that's driving a lot of the growth in this category. Feeding and diapers are an interesting one, because they're obviously the biggest categories here. And what we're seeing here is that they really sort of sit in between a shop and a chore category, and I think it really comes down there to the consumer and their sort of need for products that are more natural and organic and all that stuff. So I think when you have a category that big, it's obviously not fair to look at it in one light. You really need to dig into that. So I guess from a retail application perspective, for a lot of these high emotion categories, it's about finding the right products that really resonate with your customer. And when I say customer, I don't mean your customer across the country. I mean your customer specifically in your store. For low emotion categories, again, it really comes down, like we said before, about that price and convenience factor. So now I'll turn our attention to pet. So pet's a category that's seen a lot of rapid growth that's been driven by a couple factors. One, what we're calling the humanization of pets, and as a result of that, the premiumization within the category. So pets, we are deeming definitely a high emotion category. Consumers, primarily millennials, have begun to really start to humanize their pets and have maybe made that decision to start their family a little earlier and kind of take on pets or a pet or multiple pets in lieu of that. And with this humanization comes premiumization. So there's 3% sales growth in brick and mortar across almost all the subcategories. I think what's really interesting is Bark Shop Live. They're a retailer, a pretty small initiative that started, but they basically have this little playpen area set up with a bunch of pet accessories. I think they're more focused on dogs. And you bring your pet in, they put a collar on your pet, and your pet runs around the play area. And with the algorithms they have and the way the dog is sort of reacting, it builds a basket for you of fun toys and accessories that your pet likes. So you're really getting the pet involved in that shopping experience, which is really interesting. A couple of cool stats. One cool stat, which actually probably my favorite data point from this whole study, is that 70% of consumers who are on a diet themselves also put their pet on a diet. So that's a really interesting fact about sort of the humanization element that we're seeing there. So despite what the data shows, though, I do believe that there are some subcategories that are going to face the threat of online a bit more closely. In particular, we look at things like pet food and litter, where they are bulky items. They are recurring purchases. It's not something you want to necessarily lug home, and it's something that's pretty predictable. So despite seeing growth here in brick and mortar stores, I wouldn't be surprised if we were sitting here a year from now telling a bit of a different story. Companies like Chewy.com are a great example in their IPO this week. I took a look at sort of their growth, which is staggering. They had $200 million of revenue in 2014 and $3.5 billion this past year. So a lot of rapid growth in that space, in particular with that retailer. So what does that mean again for brick and mortar retailers? I think from a premiumization perspective, it's really about being bold. We spoke with one retailer and they said that in the past 18 months, they'd shifted 20 to 30% of their products to sort of that premium space and just seen like exponential growth. So I think like really thinking about how you push the needle and leveraging some of these consumer trends is really going to be important for driving growth in some of these categories. The other element, I guess, is really staying apprised of the pending online threat in some of these categories. It's great that we're seeing growth, but that's not always going to stay the same. And we're going to actually flip to a category where we've seen that happen in the past couple of years. So despite its high emotion shop profile, a lot of brick and mortar retailers are beginning to see emerging challenges in the home category due to online encroachment. So you can see here home and the different subcategories we refer to, things like decor, bedding, furniture, bath, et cetera. So overall, home categories were flat to slightly declining last year in brick and mortar stores. But what we really saw was that they were challenged by a lot of online players who brought a lot of innovation and convenience while really effectively targeting that sort of mid to premium price range. So we'll talk through a couple of them. Casper is one that I'm sure everyone knows. They saw 50% revenue growth in 2018, and they're planning on opening brick and mortar stores. So they're really they've done a good job of kind of penetrating and getting through the market online, but now they're really going to kind of focus on those brick and mortar stores to drive that exponential connection with their customer. Brooklinen is also another great example. They had $100 million of revenue last year. And in New York, at the end of 2018, over the holidays, they opened up a 2,000 square foot pop-up with a BYOB concept. It was buy your own bedroom. And they basically had a showroom set up with different bedroom styles and screens where you could literally click a few buttons and have everything sent directly to your home. So I talked about, I think one of the very first things I talked about was the fact that people's attention is being spread. And a lot of these online retailers are doing a great job of that by starting online, where costs are a lot lower, and then shifting to brick and mortar to really drive that emotional connection with their customer. So I think when we take a look at this here, there's still a clear place for brick and mortar when it comes to a lot of these categories, obviously, but it really comes down to focusing on that emotional connection and in-store experience. So how do you win in shop categories? So we believe winning in shop categories means really investing in experiential retail. And we think it really comes down to focus on three different elements. One is really having a curated offering. Two is really developing a connection with the consumer. And three is really effectively engaging with them on a consistent basis. So when we talk about curated offering, we're really talking about a personalized, relevant customer experiences and services within the store. You can see the stat here, 13% of retailers invested in building personalized experiences last year. So this is from the survey we did, and it's only 13%, which to me is really shocking and really telling that this needs to be something that is taken up more often and becomes more of a priority. Two is building that connection. So really creating an emotional connection through that sense of community. That is the one benefit of that brick and mortar store, is that face-to-face sense of community that you can develop. When we researched this, we found that there was a spend increase of about 2 times for customers who were emotionally connected with their retailer. The last thing is engagement. So really building that fun factor into the in-store experience. You can see here 43% of consumers would choose shopping in-store over online for that fun factor. So it really comes down to delivering on all of these 3 things in order to really win in experiential retail. So you can see at the bottom there, over half of surveyed GMDC members member retailers listed improving customer experience as one of their top 2 strategic priorities this upcoming year. So really digging deeper into that and figuring out how that customer experience is improved, and really about developing that emotional connection with them. So retailers are at a crossroads where critical decisions will need to be made on where and how to compete based on shifts in consumer behavior. So that being said, there isn't a single chore versus shop category strategy that I can offer you today. The approach really differs by retailer based on a few different factors. So one is retailer strategy. So what is your strategic imperative as a retailer? Walmart's ability and their strategy is going to be very different from your local grocer, of course, right? So it really is taking into account what the broader roadmap is for your organization. 2, what are your core capabilities? So what capabilities are actually currently core to your organization? If you're not even offering online at the moment, I think free same-day delivery is probably out of the cards for now, right? So I think you really need to think about what capabilities do I have and what can I leverage and how can I get there? And the third, which I think is actually the most important, is really the customer needs. So really the focus needs to be on what the unique needs are of your customer at a very, very localized level. And what was really important here, I think, is really active collaboration. Active collaboration between retailers and suppliers to share information about customers so that we can start to piece together what the customer actually wants. Because obviously, with needs shifting so quickly as they are, it is impossible to do it on our own. So it really does need to be a bit of a team effort here. So taking this into consideration, retailers will really need to assess their key categories and determine an approach on how to handle the trends across these chore and shop categories. And the key really is understanding what levers to pull and how far to go. So now the big question is what to do about these trends. So I'm not going to tell you that there's a clear path for either of these types of categories because so much of it depends on you. But I am going to tell you that it's time to take a risk. It's time to be bold because if you don't, your consumers will continue to change and your competitors will continue to push ahead. So I'm going to spend a few minutes right now painting a couple of illustrative examples of what next practices could look like for chore and shop categories. So again, these aren't recommendations. No one here is going to leave this room and probably do these things, which is fine, I get it. But they're more illustrations to really spark your imagination on what it could look like to really be bold and move the needle in either direction here. So optimizing chore categories requires a lot of drastic change in the way categories are merchandised. As part of the illustration, what we're going to do is talk through a few different elements that may help you sort of paint the picture here and really think about optimizing in-store productivity, which is really the goal. So one is reduced assortment. We're not talking about 5 or 10% here. Imagine taking 90% of this category, and in this example we'll use paper products, out of your store. So we're only going to keep in relevant pack sizes based on that market, larger pack sizes for suburban markets, smaller pack sizes for urban markets, et cetera, and really focus on offering that extended assortment online and enabling that ship-to-home offer through your brick-and-mortar store. And with this, what is really important here is a focus on localization, and really, really targeted localization. So one of the interesting facts we did survey on in this past study was the degree to which you localize as a retailer. 5% of respondents said they do a single chain-wide localization assortment strategy. 58% of retailers said they localize at a regional or trade area level, and 37% said they did at a store level. So definitely some progress being made here, but if you think about the trends that we saw and how linked they are to the way consumers shop, there's definitely room to improve. The second is customer-driven pricing and promo. So I talked about the example earlier with paper products and kind of the pivot that grocer made. I think here it really comes down to understanding your customers and their purchase behavior and the demographics and how you sort of shift and cater. And I think, to be honest, a lot of it is probably testing and learning. It's being bold and trying something new in a market and seeing how customers react to it and seeing how the numbers change. It could come down to other levers like preferential channel promos and pricing, or even offering things like free next day delivery and whatnot. The last thing is probably not what you think it is, reoriented planogram. So if you think about one of those stores that is very heavy in terms of buy online, pick up in store, Some categories may be shopped or kind of touched more frequently by a picker than they are by a consumer, which could be natural. So imagine reorienting your planograms so that they're catered and they're kind of laid out to optimize for a picker. So all the right products are at the right level, and they're not kind of your traditional consumer planogram because, quite frankly, they're not the ones spending the time there, the pickers are. So, I mean, definitely a few different ideas here, but I think the underlying goal really is how do I maximize that space that I have in store and maximize the productivity of that. So now we'll shift to a shop category, and we'll talk about pets. So really refining that retail experience for some of these shop categories requires very deliberate investments coupled with trade-offs from other categories that you sort of have within that box. So the first thing you really need to do is really generate additional space. So this could come from the optimization of space from some of the shop categories, or sorry, the chore categories. It could come from peripheral space that you have within the store. Think like sort of that garden center space, think your parking lot, et cetera. But overall, the goal is really to think through how you reconfigure your space to enable investments in some of these key shop categories that you identify. Second thing is smart assortment expansion. Not just assortment expansion, but smart assortment expansion. So think about it really expanding your assortment 2 to 3 times and premiumizing it as well. Really getting products in that target what the consumers need. So premium products, natural products, local brands, et cetera. And think about really digging into that category and separating the way you merchandise your chore items from the way you merchandise your shop items. So taking some of those categories like pet food and maybe reducing the assortment or moving them somewhere else within the store. Offering direct-to-home options as well. So definitely some different levers there on the assortment side that you can play with. And the last thing is really creating a non-traditional experience. So think about kind of blocking off part of your store, maybe it's sort of that garden center part of your store, and making it a pet wonderland. So think about adding in a pet daycare. I can drop my dog off while I go shopping for groceries. Think about adding grooming stations. Think about having specialized pet food and nutrition, like counsel services there. Think about having food samples there for your dog so you can see what they like and have them try it in real time. Giving them the option to run around and do games and activities, or having a dog walker take your dog out while you're shopping. So definitely a lot of options here, but I think the point is, in order to really become a destination in the category, you need to think bold and outside the box, and think about what else you could do to really make your store a destination. So I think this quote sums it up pretty well. It's a challenging time to be a retailer. This is probably one of the fastest periods of consumer change that we've seen in quite some time. But it's important to know that GM isn't dead. It's changing. And that a lot of retailers really need to start to think about the bold moves that they need to make in order to meet their customer needs. And I think I'm going to ask Greg and Mark to come up to sort of take the baton and continue that thought. So thank you.
Thanks. Nice. Test, test.
Test. Okay, there we go. All right. So a couple of really quick things, and I promise this won't be long. Mark and I both agreed that we'll get you guys out so you have an opportunity to take a break before the next session. First and foremost, I am, as the father of a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, I'm ready to trade those two in and humanize a pet. I'll tell you, I absolutely love that tactic, and my wife and I are ready to sign up. The other day, we also had a meeting, an all-associates meeting at Kroger West out in Portland, Oregon, and one of my category managers was giving a presentation, and he said, I'm going to wow you with some knowledge bombs. And I will tell you that the presentation that we were just given really has a ton of knowledge bombs in it. Now, as part of the co-chair of leading the Educational Leadership Council, we really focus on 3 things. We're really focused on 3 things. And the first is the self-care roadmap. And that mega trend, we're trying to figure out exactly, not trying, figuring out how to make sure that we're leveraging that both for retailers and our suppliers. We're also looking at how does GM fit into that in a dynamic way, and we're providing, with the help of partnerships like ATK, we're helping retailers and suppliers do that. We're also spending a lot of time on share of spend and hopefully providing some guidance there. We're really excited. Very soon we're going to be launching a report on that you guys will be able to review and see, combined with the analytics that are in this presentation along with that, how it might impact not only your company as a retailer or a supplier, but also how you might collaborate with one another and figure out how to maximize sales. And then lastly, we're really working on the center store and front end, really looking at how the information that we just saw, how that's impacting GM. I will tell you that looking at some of the numbers, it can be a little bit concerning, but opportunity always comes out of adversity. And we always, in many of the GMDC meetings that we're a part of, we talk about evolving to be able to thrive. And that is absolutely the point and the position that Kroger is taking as we look at many of the analytics here. I'm sure you guys were taking copious notes. On slide number 6, it was the comparison slide that showed 2018 over 2017 and 2017 over 2016. And if you noticed, publishing on that particular slide was all the way, it was like as far away from positive as possible. And when I saw that slide, I was kind of chuckling because last year, we were part of that bubble being way far away from the positive side of the scale. And I credit my category manager, who happens to be in the audience today, around thinking differently around that particular category. And honestly, that message is true for any one of these categories. If you really take a focus at whether it's a category that's on the increase, a category on the decrease, and you make the decision whether or not you have the right to win with your customer in that category, there is a tremendous amount of analytics out there to be able to help you guide yourself back to a positive, or put a strategy around making good decisions to drive back to positive. I think the next slide. As members of GMDC, we have a tremendous amount of access to information, and the particular slide presentation that you just saw, as well as many others, is available online at gmdc.com. And we have a couple of screenshots here of where you would go to actually find that. Many people don't understand the amount of information that is at your fingertips within the app or at GMDC, at the GMDC website. There's Nielsen data, there are these presentations. Use this information. The information that was provided last year absolutely helped the GM categories within Kroger drive strategy. And if, in fact, you're not taking this information and driving it up and down your organization, you're really missing out on a huge opportunity to use data and information to really drive strategy. So anyway, that's what I wanted to speak to. Mark?
So I would just add, and again, I don't know, most people come to these events, they don't need to hear from vendors, they need to hear from retailers like Greg. So to have a retailer like Greg and some that have been before him lead this charge on the ELC, I think is really important. And what Kroger's saying and Kroger's value out of GMDC, I think speaks volumes. I think the information that's available is important. I think what the ELC has always tried to do is lead that charge. And I would just challenge the vendor community. I don't think GM is dead. I'm more excited about it than I've ever been. I think the category, I think it's interesting. It's absolutely changing. I think we have retailers who built systems around centralized distribution in a world that's going to require micro distribution. The store of the community, that snowflake store is going to take an entirely different model. So I think it's really going to be that collaboration. But if we can agree on those fundamentals, what's driving the business, what are the aspects that we need to agree on as it relates to what we're going to measure for success, I think things that we're seeing here, the reports from A.T. Kearney, Nielsen, and a lot of the information that GMDC has been putting out for years and years under the leadership of Joanne, prior to Greg, and Bob Richardson, I think Bob's here. That information's been here, and I would argue how many people in this room, by show of hands, are using this information on any kind of frequency basis? Yeah. I will just tell you, I think retailers are going to ask more and more of us. They're going to ask us for more insights, more information in order to drive better decisions, micro decisions, what's working. So I think the value of what GMDC delivers is continuing to be very high, and I would just ask you all to get engaged and stay engaged, because I think that's the real value of this environment we work in. Two other quick thoughts. If you think about what's happened in the last 90 days, maybe even a year, where did all the shoe business go that Payless Shoes lost or went away with? And what's going to happen now that Dollar Tree's decided to break the dollar price point? And you go to Toys R Us, you can just go on and on. The business is just shifting, and I think there's billion-dollar opportunities out there for us. We just got to figure out how to jump in on those, and I can't imagine a better place than when retailers come together, provide guidance and insights for what they want, and a trade association that decides it's going to listen to that. So again, I'm just really pleased with what the ELC is doing, and ask you all to jump on and use this information. I think it's going to help us all grow our business together. So,
Jason. Yeah. So the only other thing is, again, thank you for your time. Mark and I will both be here for the next little while if you do have any questions, but otherwise I think we're good. So thank you.